Welcome to EPG Pathshala. In this module, we will be discussing Harper Lee's novel To Kill a Mockingbird. I am Niladri Chatterjee, Professor, Department of English, University of Kalyani, West Bengal. This module introduces you to the renowned American novelist Harper Lee, and more specifically to her novel To Kill a Mockingbird. We are going to look at the life of Harper Lee. We are also going to look at the ways in which this novel is of great importance not only to American literature but also to American history. This is a novel that asks very important questions about race relations. This is a novel that asks very important questions about how power operates at the level of law. And we are going to see how this novel occupies a very central position in American literature as far as our understanding of the question of race is concerned. Harper Lee was born on 28th April 1926 in Monroeville, Alabama, in the South, that is to say in the southern part of the United States of America. She is widely known not only for her novel To Kill a Mockingbird, but she is also known for the sequel of To Kill a Mockingbird, which was published last year. She grew up along with three of her siblings as a tomboy. Lee and Truman Capote, the writer, were childhood friends. After the divorce of Truman Capote's parents, he was sent to live with his mother's relatives, where he met Harper Lee. Like Truman Capote, Lee also developed an interest in literature from very early on in life. After completing her graduation, she joined the Huntington College in Montgomery, in Alabama. She continued her literary interest by contributing to her school's and to a humor magazine, also became its editor. Later, she moved to the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. The university had a system that allows its undergraduate students to practice law. Thus, while she was still a junior, she was accepted into the university's law school. This new area of study took most of her time, and eventually she had to leave the editorship of the magazine. I think it is very important for us to remember that she was actually studying law because her studies have a very great impact on the novel that she would very soon be writing. Initially, she continued her studies in law, but after a year she began to express her unhappiness about it to her parents. However, she left for New York, leaving her degree incomplete. There she worked as a ticket agent for Eastern Airlines, British Overseas Air Corporation, known as BOAC. With the help of an editor, she began her journey as a writer and wrote that much acclaimed novel To Kill a Mockingbird, and also received a Pulitzer Prize for it. Now, what can we say about this novel, which was published in 1960, and then the sequel, which I have already referred to, Go Set a Watchman, which was published last year, 2015. In this novel, she uses the narrative style of the first person singular. That is to say that when you read the novel, you almost feel as though the person who is narrating the novel is saying that to you, narrating the novel to you. She uses the first-person narrative style to delineate the characters and to create empathic feelings in the readers. Through various kinds of languages, she has maintained the distinction of social class and educational status. So while you read the novel, you will know that in the US, not everybody speaks in the same way. You speak in the way in which you are trained to speak. So therefore, what you say, how you speak, what kind of language you use entirely depends upon the kind of class that you belong to, the kind of education that you have had, the kind of society that you have grown up in. There is a difference in the language spoken by the people of white and black racial backgrounds. While the whites use a sophisticated language, the black people use a colloquial language. I would not go so far as to say that they use a colloquial language. I would much rather suggest that the kind of language that they use has got certain distinctive elements to it. It's got certain distinctive grammatical structures, it's got certain distinctive spellings. They are not necessarily colloquial, they are more, you could think of them as perhaps a kind of a dialect almost. For example, Calpurnia, who switches to white man's language at Atticus Atticus Finch's home, but later speaks in the black jargon in the company of other black people. Language has also been used to describe or to delineate characters such as Ewell, who uses foul words, which reflects his poor social and educational backgrounds. Maella's conversations reveal her lack of education. On the other hand, Atticus Finch's language is very, very formal. Tom uses colloquial English like sir for sir, chillun for children. Thus, language plays a significant role in this work of Lee because it is through language that characters are very often defined. What lies at the background of the novel? Many people believe that the novel is supposedly inspired by the real-life incident of Harper Lee's father. The character of Truman is also present. The names of three maternal aunts of Lee also become her characters. The locale described in the novel is also very much similar to the real-life locale of Lee. Supposedly, the incident that is described in the novel happened in 1936, when the writer was only 10 years of age. So the novel has many personal observations and a very personal investment on the part of the writer. The novel deals with serious issues like racial inequality and rape. It was very successful, and it was also considered one of the classics, and is still considered one of the classics of American literature. Now let us talk about the various characters in the novel. First, you have Jean Louise Finch, who is a scout. Now, Jean Louise Finch is the narrator of the story. The story begins when Scout is 6 years old and ends when she is 9. It is told when she is an adult. She is a tomboy who likes to use her fist rather than her mind to solve a problem. So you could perhaps somehow be forgiven for thinking that Jean Louise Finch is perhaps modeled on Harper Lee herself. And then we have Jeremy Atticus Finch, or Jem. He is the elder brother and friend of Scout. And then you have Atticus Finch, who is the father of Scout and Jem. He is the Maycomb attorney and also the state legislative representative. He is asked to defend Tom Robinson, who is accused of rape. There are other characters as well. Charles Baker Harris, who is known as Dill, he's a friend of Scout and Jem's, who visits every summer to live with his aunt. There is Tom Robinson, who is the accused in the rape case. There is Maella Violet Ewell, the young lady who accuses Tom of rape. There is Bob Ewell, the father of Maella Ewell and Burris Ewell. He claims to have seen Tom attacking Maella. There are, of course, Mr. Arthur Radley, also known as Boo Radley. He is the mysterious man in the story. He is never seen outside by the children. There is Nathan Radley. He is the brother of Boo Radley. And there is Reverend Sykes. He helps children understand the Tom's case and arranges seats for them in the colored balcony. What exactly is going on in the novel? The summary of it is very, very simple. After their mother passes away, Scout and Jem live with their father, Atticus, in Alabama, Maycomb. Atticus is a renowned lawyer, and the family is quite well off. And the family is actually better off than others in the society. Dill has come to spend his summer vacation at his relative's place that live next to the Finch's family. So you could be forgiven for thinking that perhaps Dill is based on the writer Truman Capote. The three children, Scout, Jem, and Dill, become friends. Dill is fascinated by the Radley place, a spooky house owned by Mr. Nathan Radley, where his brother Arthur Boo has lived for many years but has never been seen outside of the house. Atticus Finch is appointed as a lawyer to Tom Robinson. Tom is charged with rape of a white woman called Maella Ewell. No one in Maycomb wanted to defend Tom, but Atticus takes up the challenge. For this, his children are teased and taunted by calling names like nigger lover. Nigger, as you very well know, is a pejorative word that is used in the context of African Americans. Scout wants to stand by her father and fight for him, but Atticus stops her from it. One day, a group of men come with the intent of lynching Tom. Lynching basically means beating him publicly. But the incident is averted by the children, Scout, Jim and Dill. Tom does not want his children to be present at the trial. However, they are invited by the Reverend and they see the whole trial from the colored balcony. Atticus establishes the innocence of Tom, but unfortunately he is punished for the act that he never committed. It is also evident during the trial that it is Mayella who made sexual advances towards Tom, and her father Bobby Will finds that red-handed. However, one night Tom tries to escape from prison and is shot dead. Feeling humiliated despite the verdict, Bob avenges against Atticus. He attacks Jim and Scout, who were returning from a Halloween party, but someone comes to rescue them. Over here, I think I would probably need to mention what is a Halloween party. A Halloween party is basically a gathering, it's a party that is held on the night of 31st of October, which is celebrated in America as Halloween's night. However, in this scuffle, Bob dies and Jim breaks his arm. The stranger takes the children back to their house and Scout realizes that it is Boo who has rescued them. Now, what are the major themes and issues discussed in the novel? If not discussed, at least what are the major themes that are touched upon or dealt with in the novel? First, and the most important theme, the one that probably dominates all of the discussion of To Kill a Mockingbird, is racism. Racism, therefore, is one of the major themes in the novel. The novel is set in the early 1930s. This is also the time of the Great Depression, as you will remember from the previous modules in which we have talked about a period of economic deprivation and poverty across the United States. During this time, blacks were the highly subjugated people of the society. They were not allowed to move along with whites, share their spaces, walk or sit with whites. This is seen throughout the novel. So what we are looking at in the novel is severe racial segregation. Racial segregation is that policy which basically means that there will be certain public spaces that will be only available to whites, and there will be certain public spaces that will be only available to non-whites, more importantly to African Americans. For example, the separate place for the blacks in the court where Scout, Jim and Dill, children of white man, but they were sitting in the colored balcony to see the trial since there was no place, and also because their father chose to defend a black man, Tom Robinson. So this is something which I think we really need to talk about, because this case stands as the fight against racism. Mr. Atticus Finch defends Tom, and all the evidences are very strongly supportive of Tom, and they basically prove Tom's innocence. The only factor that can go against Tom, and it does, is his skin color. Tom is black. And eventually it becomes reality once again. Tom is punished for the crime that he has not committed. It happens so because he's a black man and his accuser is a white woman. Atticus and a handful of people fight against the racial discrimination, but they cannot ultimately succeed. However, Atticus explains to Scout that though they have lost the cause and though they have lost the case, but it does help them stand against racism, and it is proved through the jury's long period of discussion before the decision is made. Otherwise, it does not take much time for them to decide. The other important theme that one has to talk about is, of course, right there in the title, Mockingbird. What is a mockingbird? The mockingbird represents all that is good in this world, as they do not harm anyone. They are just busy themselves in singing. Thus, it is a sin to kill a mockingbird. This is what is explained to the children, and it is maintained throughout the novel too. For example, in the novel, Tom becomes the symbol of mockingbird, since the whites have sinned by killing an innocent man just because he is black. Further, Atticus Finch also explains to his children when he gives them a shooting gun for the first time. He explains to them, when he gave us our air rifles, Atticus wouldn't teach us to shoot. Uncle Jack instructed us in the rudiments thereof. He said Atticus wasn't interested in guns. Atticus said to Jem one day, "I'd rather you shoot at tin cans in the backyard, but I know you'll go after birds. Shoot all the blue jays if you want, if you can hit 'em, but remember it's a sin to kill a mockingbird." So from this we can actually make a very important argument as well about violence in the novel. How is violence represented in the novel? Violence in the novel is clearly represented through the use of air rifles. Killing of the mockingbird is regarded as a violent act. Further, before the decision is made by the jury members and it is declared that Tom is guilty, there is a dense stillness that appears in the atmosphere even as the mockingbirds fall silent. "I shivered," goes the story, "though the night was hot. The feeling grew until the atmosphere in the courtroom was exactly the same as a cold February morning when the mockingbirds were still." Further, there is another example of mockingbird in Boo Radley, who lives his life silently and has never harmed anyone in his life. So can we therefore say that this novel is also an attempt at trying to make a case for non-violence? So we look at social inequality in the novel, we look at education, we look at courage, we look at law, we look at the tussle between good and evil, we look at violence, and we look at non-violence. And of course, there is also the element of racism. Now, what we really need to therefore concentrate on is the way in which the novel was being written at a time when America was in the throes of racial discrimination. And this racial discrimination is something that many authors have articulated. This is a racial discrimination that is most clearly articulated, of course, in the speech by Martin Luther King, "I Have a Dream," which is there as a part of your syllabus. And we are therefore going to try and connect what are there in the other modules to what is there in this module, because that is when you will get a much clearer picture of the way in which this particular module works. Harper Lee was widely anthologized, widely used in various university syllabi. Her book, To Kill a Mockingbird, has consistently been read as a book that argues against racism. But over here, I think I would really have to mention that when the sequel to Kill a Mockingbird was published, Go Set a Watchman, it was revealed to everybody's shock that Atticus Finch, the man who so bravely defended and fought for the rights of a black man, is exposed as somebody who secretly belonged to a racist organization. In fact, it is probably believed that Atticus Finch was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. So this is something which created a lot of controversy. A lot of people were very upset. Many people said that they will never be able to read To Kill a Mockingbird ever again, knowing what they know now about what lay at the heart of Atticus Finch. But I think even when Harper Lee is revealing Atticus Finch to have secretly been a part of a racist white supremacist organization, what she's basically trying to say is that perhaps Atticus Finch is a character who believes in what is true. He may have been racist in his private life, but he still tries to take up the case of Tom Robinson because he believes that Tom Robinson was innocent. And of course, all the evidence clearly proves that Tom Robinson was innocent. So here is a man who perhaps believed in a certain ideology which is harmful, but professionally he was talking about and he was trying to fight for what he felt was the duty of his profession. When we look at Harper Lee, we therefore have to understand that as a white woman living in the South, she is writing a novel that argues against racism. In doing this, she is also trying to make a bigger argument, a greater argument about the way in which you do not have to belong to a certain community to write about it. You can also write about that community from the outside. Remember, Harper Lee is not black. So the fact that she is not an African American itself, many people would therefore say she may not be qualified to write a novel like this. She only proves them wrong, because she writes a novel against racism, even though she personally may not have suffered as a result of it. So as we go through the novel, we therefore come to understand that American literature is that much richer because we have a novel like Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. What we really have to understand is that as we go through the novel, we are going to also try and make a very important revelation to ourselves, that is, how to sensitize children to questions of right and wrong, how to sensitize children to questions of race, how to sensitize children to the question of criminality, to questions of justice, to questions of the way in which violence works and the way in which non-violence works. I think it is rather significant that the novel is written in the voice of a very young girl, because when she is writing as a young girl, or at least she is writing as a woman looking back on her childhood, she is therefore making a very important case of the way in which children should be sensitized towards bigger questions of hatred, of violence, of discrimination that they are going to find once they have grown up in an adult world. I think it is significant for us to remember that when they go to watch the trial, they are actually being sat in the colored seats. Now remember that the colored seats are meant for the African Americans. The colored seats are meant for the black people. So why are the children being seated there? They are being seated there clearly because there is no space in the white section, but that is not the simple point. There is another point. There is another point. The point is that maybe these children represent a world that is beyond race. Maybe these children are trying to think about a world which is not divided into black and white. So Harper Lee is constructing this tale, of course, which is in many ways autobiographical, as I have told you. This could very well have been inspired by her father's career. This could very well have been inspired by the fact that she herself studied law. But what we should always remember is that she is constructing a novel which raises very important questions about the way in which justice is delivered. Because if you remember, Tom Robinson ultimately does not get to enjoy his freedom. He does not get to enjoy the verdict of his innocence. And the only reason why he does not do that is simply because of his skin color. So look at the way in which justice is ultimately not done. And it is not done not because of lack of evidence. It is not done simply because once this is a black man that has been accused of a crime, the public is therefore determined to prove that if the crime is said to have committed by a black man, then the black man must be guilty. It is the assumption of guilt on the part of the black man by the white majority, which is something that is being critiqued by Harper Lee. So in conclusion, I would therefore want to say that once you are reading the novel, please be aware of the way in which this novel actually feeds into greater discourses about the way in which race functions in the American literary history. And when we are talking about race, I would want you to go all the way back to where the module started. I would want you to go all the way back to the 18th century, even into the 17th century, to look at slave narratives. So when you're looking at slave narratives, look at the way in which their sufferings are done, are communicated. Look at the slave narratives, then come to the 19th century and look at the way in which there are people like Walt Whitman who are actually already arguing against slavery. Look at the history of the Civil War, which was clearly started because some people wanted to abolish slavery, people of the North, and there were some who actually did not want slavery to be abolished, people of the South. Look at how, as a result of the war, slaves may have been freed, but the racism that was created continues to inform the way in which Americans think about themselves. Look at the way in which the white-black binary continues to operate, even though Americans may or may not believe it or may not acknowledge it. So the deep-seated racism in America that was there 300 years ago continues to be there today. And on the racial front, there seems to have been a certain cosmetic number of changes, but deep down inside, racial antagonisms are very much present. And I think Harper Lee, when she was writing this rather extraordinary novel, she was trying to make a very simple case that sometimes justice that is supposed to be blind, by which I mean that justice is supposed to be impartial, ultimately is not impartial because it depends on who the accused is. If the accused is a white man, chances are that he will be set free. If the accused is a black man, chances are he will be found guilty, whether he has committed the crime or not. This extremely dark, this extremely depressing message is something that Harper Lee is trying to communicate. And I hope that when you are reading To Kill a Mockingbird, you will also eventually read Go Set a Watchman, because it would be interesting for you to compare how a narrative is shaped many decades ago and how that narrative has evolved many decades later. So do please read this novel, these two novels side by side, and I think that is going to give you a greater impression, a greater understanding of the way in which race, justice, innocence, guilt, non-violence and violence work in American literature in general, and in this novel by Harper Lee in particular. Thank you.